this section, in connection with 2 or more felonies, the sentencing court shall impose on the offender the prison term specified under Division B1A of this section for each of the 2 most serious specifications of which the offender is convicted or to which the offender pleads guilty, and in its discretion also may impose on the offender the prison term specified under that division for any or all of the remaining specifications. Therefore, I find that specifications to count 1, 2, and 3 do not merge pursuant to 2929-14B1G. Mr. Perry, would you like to talk to Mr. Nixon about a PSI, or is he prepared to waive that right? Sure.
He sat there trembling, a man drenched in regret and denial. The courtroom lights reflected off his wet eyes as his voice cracked not from pain, but from disbelief at what he'd done. Everyone in that silent room could feel it. Something monstrous had happened long before this moment. A woman's laughter once filled a house now sealed off by police tape. In the space where music used to play, investigators found only chaos, shards of glass, and silence that screamed louder than any siren. Hours earlier, neighbors remembered hearing shouting, a scuffle, then sudden quiet. The kind of quiet that makes your stomach turn. One moment, it was just another late-night gathering. The next, a life was erased in an instant of madness. They said he looked terrified before it happened, pacing, whispering to himself, gripping a weapon he swore he needed for protection. His mind clouded, his hands shaking. But the fear wasn't of danger coming toward him. It was of something twisted inside him. Later, when officers found him hiding in an attic, he didn't fight. He just sat there, muttering that he didn't remember, that he had to do it. Maybe he believed that. Maybe he didn't. But what followed left even hardened detectives speechless. At trial, he'd claim it wasn't murder, that it was confusion, paranoia, a nightmare that spiraled too fast to stop. But the truth was colder, crueler. A mother never made it home that night. A daughter woke up to a world without her. Family photos became evidence. Birthday balloons became reminders. And a once ordinary man, trained to heal others, became a symbol of how far darkness can drag a person when fear meets addiction. Every witness told a different version, but they all ended the same, with a gun raised and a decision that could never be undone. As the judge read the verdict, his composure shattered. His sobs echoed through the room, the kind that carry no redemption, only the sound of a man realizing that forgiveness may never come. And yet, beneath all the horror and the tears, one question still lingers. Was this a monster consumed by madness or a man destroyed by his own mind? But what he did next shocked everyone watching. Viewer discretion is advised. The following case contains details some may find disturbing. Before we begin, take a second to hit subscribe and tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. To everyone who's liked, shared, or commented, your support helps us bring light to stories that deserve to be remembered. Welcome to the final hour, where every truth comes too late. Today's case takes us deep into the paranoia and downfall of a man who couldn't tell fear from guilt. He wasn't born a monster. That's the part people often forget. Before the headlines, before the mugshot, Quinton Nixon was just another boy from Akron trying to find his footing in a city that could swallow you whole if you blinked too long. He grew up in a small single-story home where struggle lived quietly behind every closed door. His mother worked double shifts to keep food on the table. His father drifted in and out, leaving more memories of absence than affection. For most of his youth, Quinton carried the silent weight of wanting to prove he could be better than where he came from. Teachers described him as bright but distracted. He had a knack for fixing things, small electronics, engines, even people's moods. He wanted to help, to heal, to matter. That's what drove him into healthcare years later, where he trained to become a medical assistant. To those who knew him then, Quinton was the type who'd offer a ride home, not the one who'd end a life. But under that calm exterior there was restlessness, the kind that doesn't fade with time. He battled bouts of anger that no one understood, moments where his temper turned a quiet room into chaos. Friends brushed it off as stress, exhaustion, or bad luck. His mother prayed it would pass. As an adult, Quinton's world was split in two. By day, he wore scrubs, assisting nurses and caring for patients. By night, he drowned the ache in noise, bars, smoke, and fast company. The man who once spoke gently to the elderly at work became someone else when the lights dimmed. People who crossed his path said he was unpredictable, sometimes charming, sometimes brooding, always intense. Those who got too close felt something fragile beneath the surface, like a man balancing between redemption and ruin. Then came the arrests, minor at first. A bar fight here, a charge for assault there. Each incident chipped away at his future, but Quinton always found a way to rationalize it. They provoked me. It wasn't my fault. The excuses stacked up like invisible walls, keeping the truth out and the anger in. By 2022, at 33, Quinton was drifting. No steady job, few friends, and a growing dependency on meth. He told people it helped him think, that it calmed the storms in his mind. In reality, it only made them louder. That summer, he crossed paths with Toni Westover, a fellow medical assistant, single mother, and someone who radiated warmth even in her mistakes. They weren't friends, not really. Just two broken people in the same room at the wrong time, both seeking escape in the same poison. Toni was everything he once wanted to be. Caring, steady, kind-hearted. She'd worked hard to raise her daughter and keep her life together despite her own battles. Maybe that's what drew him to her that night, a reflection of the person he'd lost somewhere along the way. Their connection was brief, fragile, and built on a foundation of smoke and paranoia. There was no history between them, no feud or betrayal, just two strangers whose choices collided in one irreversible moment. Looking back, there were signs, patterns written across his past like warning lights. A history of aggression, a growing mistrust of others, and a dangerous tendency to see enemies where none existed. He'd lost touch with reality long before that night on Maryland Avenue. The drugs only gave his fears a voice. In the weeks before the shooting, neighbors saw him pacing outside, muttering about people watching him, recording him, plotting against him. He'd lost weight, stopped sleeping, and looked like a man chasing shadows no one else could see. If anyone had intervened, a family member, a counselor, a friend, maybe it could have been different. Maybe Toni would still be alive. But addiction isolates, and paranoia builds walls thicker than prison bars. By the time the two of them sat in that dimly lit living room surrounded by strangers, it wasn't fate that sealed what happened next. It was the years of unresolved pain, the ghosts of anger never confronted, and the illusion that fear can justify violence. No one in that room could have predicted how fast everything would fall apart. But what he did next shocked everyone watching. The night everything broke. By late July 2022, Quinton Nixon was unraveling quietly. He'd stopped showing up for work. His family barely heard from him. The only thing that seemed constant was the endless haze of nights that blurred into each other. He called it escape. Everyone else called it disappearance. In the days before it happened, people noticed a shift in him. His eyes darted quicker, his tone sharper. He spoke about people following him, watching from cars that never existed. He'd stare through windows like he expected someone to appear on the other side. Even those who were with him said he looked like he hadn't slept in days. That Sunday night in Akron, Ohio, he arrived at a modest home on Maryland Avenue, a house known for its come-and-go crowd. The walls carried the smell of smoke, music buzzed low from a speaker, and the table was cluttered with half-empty cans, lighters, and broken conversations. Among the few people there was Toni Westover, 34, sitting with her boyfriend and a couple of others. She wasn't close to Nixon. They'd met only briefly through mutual friends. She'd come to unwind, unaware that she was walking into the orbit of a man whose mind was already fracturing. At first, everything seemed ordinary. The laughter, the jokes, the unspoken need to feel normal for a night. But as hours passed and reality thinned, Nixon began pacing. His tone shifted from calm to suspicious. He kept asking questions that didn't make sense, glancing at Toni's phone, convinced she was recording him. The others laughed it off. Toni tried to steady the mood, brushing away his paranoia with patience. But his breathing grew heavy. His words turned clipped, defensive. He believed he was being set up, cornered, betrayed by people he barely knew. Then something small, a movement, a glance, maybe the light from a phone screen, became the spark. He froze, eyes wide, whispering that they were lying to him, that he wasn't safe. No one took it seriously, not until he reached for what would end everything. He brought out a pistol and shot Toni. In that instant, fear ruled the room. The man who once cared for patients was now lost inside a storm of delusion. What he saw as survival was, in truth, collapse. Years of addiction, fear, and untreated rage finally consuming him. The chaos that followed was fast, frantic, and irreversible. The calm that came afterward was worse, a silence thick enough to choke on. Outside, the neighborhood slept, unaware that within that small house lives had just been split in two before and after. When the first officers arrived, the scene was still. Nixon was gone. What he left behind would haunt Akron for months. This wasn't the act of a man caught in the moment. It was the final chapter of a mind that had been slipping for years. The signs had been there, the paranoia, the sudden anger, the sleepless nights. But no one connected the dots until it was too late. And in the middle of it all, an innocent mother paid the price for someone else's unraveling sanity. When dawn broke over Maryland Avenue, the neighborhood woke to sirens, flashing lights, and whispers that something unthinkable had happened. A call for help had brought first responders racing to the house, a scene so heavy that even seasoned officers fell silent when they stepped inside. Detectives from the Akron Police Department's homicide unit arrived within the hour. Among them was a veteran investigator who later described that morning as one of the hardest of his career. What they found told a story of panic and fear. But one person was missing: Quinton Nixon. The search began almost immediately. Witnesses at the house were questioned through the haze of shock and exhaustion. One of them, Brian Fielder, struggled to speak through tears as he recounted how a night meant for escape turned into something they could never undo. His words painted Nixon not as a cold planner, but as a man overtaken by delusion. For the next 3 days, the city watched as Nixon vanished into the cracks of Akron. Flyers went up, and police followed every tip: abandoned houses, gas stations, relatives' homes. Finally, a lead came from a cousin who noticed strange noises in his attic. SWAT moved in quietly, surrounding the small home before sunrise. When they found Nixon, he wasn't armed. He wasn't even fighting. He sat in the corner of the attic, knees drawn up, whispering that people had been after him, that none of it was real. The arresting officer said he looked more haunted than defiant. During interrogation, Nixon wavered between denial and guilt. At moments, he claimed self-defense. At others, he admitted he'd lost control. He insisted that he thought someone in the room had been plotting against him. There was no confession, only confusion, and the hollow echo of paranoia that had already destroyed 2 lives. Detectives gathered what remained of the night: shell casings, fingerprints, messages from Toni's phone, and residue tests. Everything pointed back to him. When the evidence was laid out, Nixon sat motionless, staring at the table like he could somehow will it away. Before the trial, court-appointed psychologists evaluated him. They described a man capable of understanding his actions but deeply affected by stimulant-induced paranoia. Not legally insane, but lost in a distorted sense of reality. It wasn't an excuse, but it explained the chaos in his mind. In October 2024, the case moved to Bike Summit County Court, presided over by Macri Judge Christine Croce. Nixon chose the unthinkable path: to represent himself. No legal team, no filter, just a man arguing for his freedom against the system that now held every piece of his past. The prosecution, led by the Summit County District Attorney's Office, built its argument around cold evidence: the weapon, the text Toni sent minutes before her death, and the witness testimony that described Nixon's paranoia and flight. They painted him as dangerous, unpredictable, and responsible for turning fear into violence. Nixon's defense choirs was fragmented, emotional, and inconsistent. He claimed he was attacked first, that others were part of a setup. He questioned witnesses himself, sometimes with anger, sometimes through tears. His words came out scattered, his logic tangled, a portrait of a man trapped between guilt and self-delusion. Throughout the trial, Toni's family sat quietly in the front row, her mother, Peggy Westover, and her sister, Amy Perry, clutching each other's hands as the footage and testimony replayed the night they'd lost her. Their presence reminded everyone that behind the legal arguments were real lives forever changed. When the verdict finally came, the courtroom seemed to stop breathing. Guilty of murder, felonious assault, tampering with evidence, and improper handling of a firearm. The words fell like stone. Nixon's composure cracked. He broke down, sobbing uncontrollably, calling out for forgiveness. From Toni's family, from his own mother, from anyone who would listen. Judge Croce's tone was steady but heavy. She acknowledged the sorrow in his eyes, but reminded the room that remorse cannot erase consequence. "Whatever led you down this path," she said, "has cost more than you can ever repay." The sentence: life in prison with the possibility of parole after 21 years, plus additional time for related charges. Nixon was escorted out quietly, his mother weeping in the gallery. Toni's family stood together afterward, their faces a mix of relief and unbearable grief. Justice had been served, but no sentence could fill the space she left behind. And as the doors of that courtroom closed, one truth lingered in the air. A reminder that every decision, every moment of neglect, and every silent warning ignored had led to this point. But what he said next left the room in stunned silence. When the courtroom emptied, silence followed. But for those who had lived through it, the echoes didn't fade. They just found new places to live. Toni Westover's. The family left that courthouse holding each other, the same way they had the day she was buried. Her mother, Peggy, said the verdict didn't bring peace, only pause. A small moment to breathe before grief returned. Her sister, Amy, would later write online that justice is not closure. It's just the end of one battle and the beginning of another. For Toni's daughter, life became a long stretch of questions without answers. She grew up seeing her mother's smile in framed photos, hearing her voice only through old videos. Family friends stepped in to help raise her, trying to keep Toni's warmth alive in bedtime stories and birthday wishes that now carried a quiet ache. In Akron, the case rippled through the community like a warning, a reminder of how addiction and fear can corrode the very fabric of ordinary life. Churches held vigils. Recovery centers used Toni's name in awareness programs, urging people to seek help before despair turns destructive. Her story became more than a crime. It became a symbol of what can be lost when no one steps in soon enough. As for Quinton Nixon, the man at the center of it all, he was transferred to North Central Correctional Institution, a mid-level security facility surrounded by endless fences and time. Now in his mid-30s, he spends his days between routine and reflection, a shadow of the man who once walked into a hospital each morning to help others. Inmates who've crossed paths with him describe someone quiet, withdrawn, spending most of his hours in the library or chapel. He still insists that what happened that night wasn't what people think. He's filed at least one appeal, arguing self-defense and mental instability, but none have changed the outcome. His first chance at parole will come in 2045, a year that feels more like a lifetime away. For his mother, the guilt has never lifted. She once told a reporter outside the courthouse that she prays for Toni's family every night. And for her son's soul, too. "I didn't raise a monster," she said softly. "But somewhere, I lost the boy I knew." Toni's family, meanwhile, continues to speak her name. Each July, they gather at a park she once loved, releasing lanterns into the sky. They don't talk about the trial anymore, only about her kindness, her laughter, and the daughter she adored. The story faded from national headlines, but in Akron, people still remember. They remember the mother whose intuition whispered, "Something doesn't feel right." They remember the system that tried to untangle fear from fact. And they remember how one night destroyed two families who never even knew they were bound together. In the end, the case became more than a courtroom tragedy. It became a reflection of a question that haunts many. How does a healer become the source of harm? And at what point does fear turn into fate? Some call it madness, others call it consequence. But inside those prison walls, Quinton Nixon lives with both: the silence, the time, and the truth that no appeal can rewrite. And as the years pass, one thing remains certain. For every life taken by chaos, there's a family left to carry the quiet. Because when the final hour comes, justice doesn't always heal. It simply remembers. You've been watching The Final Hour. If you made it this far, thank you for helping us keep these stories alive. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and I'll meet you in the next case.